Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. Holly's back here in the background. I think you can probably see her over there. She's up and about and exploring the garden back here. The Learn to Garden video series that is over on my website. This week I put up a plant shopping video. I went up to Homewood Nursery in North Raleigh, did a video for that. The next video going up on there is basically how to plant. So it's going to be all about planting in different soil types, that kind of thing. So that video will be up on that series. There's a discount code down below the video if you're interested in that. I think there's only like 3 videos that went up this week. There'll be an unboxing video tomorrow or the next day after you're watching this. The lawn out here is covered in plants right this minute for things that I just took out of boxes that are going to go in some container planting videos that are coming pretty soon. And I don't remember what else, but they put it, like I said, there's like 3 videos that went up. Oh, a native plant video you should have seen the day before this video goes up from home. That was another thing I shot up at Homewood Nursery while we were up there. So anyway, should be some pretty good content this week, really moving the garden forward. And that was one of the things, redesigning the vegetable garden space over here. We have a lot of plans for how that's going to look over the next month or 2 if you're following along with the channel. So anyway, lots of great gardening questions asked this past week. You can ask gardening questions down in the comments below. Your comment is your question. Sometimes I get that as, where do I put my question? Your comment is your question. So just ask them down there, and I pick from those each week. I think I wrote down like 22 or something, and there were tons. And so I appreciate the participation in this video. It gets, you know, more and more and more over time. Let's see. Somebody asked about mulching bulbs before they emerge, and would the bulbs still be able to push up through? Yeah, as long as you're putting your normal amount of mulch out. If your bulbs haven't emerged yet, they'll fight their way up through it. I wouldn't put 4, 5, 6 inches of mulch out there, but if you're putting down, you know, a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, absolutely, the bulbs won't have any problem pushing up through that at all. They're amazing what they can push up through, honestly. So my biggest issue is we're about to mulch out here, and all my bulbs are up. And so that becomes, you know, you can't get out here with a rake and really throw it around and stuff. I got to be a little more cautious with my perennials that are coming up and my bulbs that are coming up. I probably would have liked to have gotten this mulching done about 3 weeks ago, and I would have had less hand work, you know, or small little handful work that I'm going to have to do now. But that's life. A lot of things have just emerged earlier than they would have in the past. Okay, so somebody has a self-watering seeding thing and they wanted to know if their seeds are potentially staying too wet. Yes, if it's some sort of I would not want any kind of self-watering thing on my seeds. I do not want to keep them. I actually want my seedling trays to dry out just a bit. Not saying to let them get completely dry, but I want the seedling trays to become mostly dry before I water them. And so I've just kind of gotten used to how much does the tray weigh when it's fully wet. So when I wet out the seed starting mix that I'm using and put the seeds in, you know, how much does that weigh when it's fully wet? And then how much did it weigh before I put the water on it? You know, how light is that? You know, I want to get back toward that lighter weight before I'm watering each time. So I don't want some consistent amount of water always on it. I want it to ebb and flow some. So I find that keeping my seedlings, I don't want to say dry, but drier than wet for sure, is kind of key. And again, I just don't want any kind of automated thing in the way of that. And most things I don't want on an automatic watering system, other than maybe outdoor containers that you can kind of predict are going to need water every day just because they're in a container. But most of the things in the ground, or again in my seedlings, I want to make the choice as to, I want to actually check, see that they need water before I water, because again, there are far more plants loved to death than there are, you know, neglected to death. Somebody got 3 Mystic Spire salvias. Doesn't really matter what the plant is, but they actually bought 2, and they realized they wanted a 3rd one, went back to the store, got a 3rd one, brought it home, and the foliage color is a little bit different on them. I wanted to know if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, imagine the fertilizer was just running out more on that third one if you went back to the same store to get them. My guess is it's just, again, there's some sort of fertilizer difference in the container. When we're growing container plants in a nursery setting and they're growing them in some sort of bark mix, the fertilizer that those plants get are 100% from some sort of synthetic fertilizer that's going on the top of that container. So if it's not incorporated into the container, it's just top-dressed fertilizer. Imagine one of those pots fell over on the table because it got wind, the wind blew it over, and a lot of that fertilizer spilt out. Then the employee came and stood it back up, and then they got watered 3 more times since then, and all of a sudden one just doesn't have as much fertilizer as the other. So you can see subtle differences in foliage color just from that just that little thing happening. I had my guys would, I have them top dress plants in a bed and inevitably miss one, and about 2 weeks later, you could see, the 1 plant or 2 plants or 5 plants in the block that were slightly off colored, pretty quickly. So that can happen pretty quick. It had no long-term impact on the plant, really, but that's what that is. It's some sort of fertilizer difference. Let's see. So somebody said, they see some of my videos, they're interested in a plant from the video, and then they can't find it. Does that mean it doesn't grow well in their area? Maybe. That's certainly possible. I do put the zones down at the bottom. On most of my videos, I try to put the zones that they're supposed to grow in. Obviously, zones have microclimates and, drier areas and wetter areas and more humid areas and all kinds of things, so that can make a plant that does well in zone 9 in Florida not do well in zone 9 in Arizona. Just for obvious reasons. There's very different overall climates, even though the average low temperature is the same for that area. So there can be differences like that. But if it should grow in your zone and you can't find it, one of the big things is there's so many new gardeners since the shutdown. 3 years ago, there's 28 million new gardeners, and I'm still going in nurseries and seeing bare fabric. I can put my drone up over a nursery and see that, a third of the nursery is still empty. They've struggled to keep up and fill it back up. It's been great for the nursery business for the last, 3 years, because basically almost anything they finish has been sold pretty regularly, but we're still behind. And so frequently, and we're also slow to build up numbers on things, in this kind of situation. There's also labor issues in farming all across the country. So there's a lot of reasons, pots have been short. Literally couldn't even get truckloads of pots, a year ago. So, there's a lot of reasons in the pipeline. And then these plants can't get stamped out. I've got this, here's a crepe myrtle right here. And even though it's only in a 2-gallon container, it's about 24 inches tall. This cutting was stuck 2 years ago, in all likelihood. It was probably just right up on 2 years at this point, even though it was grown down on the Gulf Coast and they have long growing seasons. That plant still takes a couple of years. So if you imagine 3 years ago, all the plants being wiped out everywhere, how long that would take. Then again, with shortages of containers, shortages of fertilizer, shortages of potting media, all of those things combined together. So if you're not finding something, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't grow in your area, although it could be. It's probably more than likely just a nursery industry trying to catch up, and you can't stamp these things out. They take a long time to grow. Okay, so I got the occasional question about, am I left-handed? Yes, I am. I write left-handed. I kick left-footed, I bat right-handed, I throw right-handed. So what is that? I don't know. I guess it's just your dominant writing hand. So that makes me left-handed. But literally, I am a mess of doing different things with, doing different activities with different feet or different hands. I golf right-handed. I have no idea why, but it's kind of interesting. I know people that are opposite, that right-handed, and then, I know somebody golfs left-handed and writes right-handed, and that one's kind of weird too. Let's see. So somebody brought plants outside. So you take your seedlings, you start your seedlings in the house, you bring them outside, so you're acclimating them to the sun, you know, before they go into you're hardening them off is what it is. You're hardening them off to the temperatures outside and hardening them off to the sunlight. Then all of a sudden here comes a frost and you rush them back inside and you leave them in there for 2 days. Do you have to re-harden them off? Yes, at least a little bit. It doesn't take long at all for a plant's ability to lose its ability to stand up in the sunlight. And the way I know this is I had a spot at the Raleigh Farmers Market, and we had basically we had a space inside and a space outside. So we had an outdoor space that's in, you know, full sun, and then under the shelter there's just no light, no direct sun at all. I had to constantly rotate plants in and out of those two situations, because if I brought plants under that shelter and left them there for 3 or 4 days, and then a customer bought them and took them home and put them in the full sun, the foliage would burn on them. So we were constantly rotating things out from the shade to the sun. It was annoying, but really no choice. If you left something, even for a short period of time, out that needs sun, out of the sun, it quickly, the foliage quickly changes as it's trying to figure out how to gather more light. Then you take it out in the sun, and it's kind of re-engineered itself to collect lots of light, and boy, that burns them. So yeah, you do need to reacclimate them. You know, not probably as much as you did the first time. Let's see. We did put up a couple garden plants videos this past week. I know the Carolina Jessamine video went up. Put one video up this week and put the wrong, the little thing that comes up at the end that kind of shows the details of the plants. Put the wrong photo on one. That's life. I think I put up 1,300 videos before I made a mistake that bad on one. So that was, it happens. Let's see. Somebody asked if I have hellebores. Yeah, lots of hellebores. And then would I do a video on hellebores? There's several hellebore videos on the channel. And if you'll go back to, there's a video from maybe a month ago. It was what's blooming in February video. Not all, but a lot of my hellebores are in that video if you want to go back and watch it. And that was another video that went up this week, is what's blooming out here this past week. And you can see, there's lots of flowers, lots of flowering things going off out here right now. But the hellebores were in a video about a month ago. And a month before that, I did a video about pruning hellebores if there's a hellebore maintenance video as well. Okay. So somebody has a western, so I talked about red buds really kind of needing part shade here. They tend to be understory trees. They tend to grow on the edge of the wood lines where they can get their roots kind of shaded, but the top of the trees kind of out in the sun. You'll notice that driving along the interstate here, a lot of the red buds and dogwoods are right on the edge of the woods. Unfortunately, the Bradford pears, the Callery pears are taking over that space very, very quickly, unfortunately, but that's life. They have a western red bud and they seem to take more sun. Yeah, I mean, that's just an evolutionary thing. So the western red buds are Cercis occidentalis, and they do, take more sun, just having evolved out in more open space out in the west, where our red buds are Cercis canadensis, and they tend to be, my forest pansy red bud at the old house was in a lot of sun, and the top of the plant can take lots of sun. The roots really prefer to be down in a shadier spot. And so typically there's a dogwood in my neighbor's back garden here that's right on the edge of the wood line, and the top of the plant is sticking out to get as much sun as it can get. And the roots are sitting down there, being shaded. And so that's typically what you'll see, where they choose to grow. For me, I've got this red bud, this weeping red bud out in lots of sun, but it's underplanted with some other things. So the roots are kind of protected. That's the main thing. But yeah, there's definitely, obviously, an evolutionary difference between one evolving on the East Coast and then the other one getting separated, by distance, by mountain ranges and things like that, and evolving slightly differently. Okay, and then provenance or provenance. It's one of those words that I hear differently every time it's said, but provenance, the area that a plant is found in, even if it's the same species. So this is Cercis canadensis. This is our eastern redbud. The Mexican redbud is Cercis canadensis variety mexicana. and it is way more heat tolerant, even though it's still canadensis. So it kind of even matters within the same species of plants where something is found. So if somebody's working on a plant introduction and they're working with material, let's say it's a plant that grows from Connecticut all the way down to North Florida, it matters where the original material they're using came from, even within the same species. One that's been sitting in Florida for the last 1,000 years separated from one that's further up north, there's going to be some differences in them. So even within the same species, you can get differences in the amount of sun something will take, or the amount of water it will take, or the amount of whatever it will take. So there's a lot of words from Jim. Somebody got a gold rider Leyland cypress, which is just a gold foliage Leyland cypress, and they have 2 leaders. They wanted to know when to cut out. So basically you got two main branches coming up. When was the best time to cut them out? Cut one of them out. The sooner the better. I mean, the more age it has on it, the more, the thinner the plant's going to be after you cut it out. So the sooner the better, and it can recover from quickly. There's always tons of questions about plants not blooming in the first year or growing properly in the first year. I mean, it always starts with, I planted such and such 3 months ago, or I planted such and such in the fall, I transplanted such and such in the spring. If this anything to do with your question, the plant's not going to be at its best that first season. If you went and dug something up and moved it somewhere else, or you went and, whenever you put it in, or, don't worry about the fact that it doesn't bloom its best the first year. Frequently, I'll take flowers off of things the first year just to encourage the growth of the plant, the long-term success of the plant. So keep that in mind. There's always tons of questions about why something didn't bloom and it's only been in the ground for 3 months. A lot of the reason it didn't bloom is probably because it's only been in the ground for 3 months. And it's just under some sort of stress related to that. So, I wouldn't judge anything like that until the second season. Let's see. Somebody asked, what weed barrier do I recommend? 0. I've got 2 videos on the channel over the 6 years about using weed control fabric. You can go back and look at those videos. So there's no plastic weed barrier going down in this landscape. For free country, you do what you're going to do. But I mean, every bit of that weed barrier that I see that's old in landscapes, people are regretting it. Weeds end up growing on top of it anyway, and then the plastic is just going to break down into microplastic in your soil in the future. You're going to weed. I mean, it's just, that's the part of gardening is, don't be scared of the plants touching one another. Okay, the plants touching one another and being planted more densely is your biggest weed protection. It just is. So this garden is planted very tight, and then there are still some weeds. And that's just kind of the way that works. That's gardening. Let's see. Somebody asked about planting around a low window. So they got basement windows in the front of their garden. A lot of the consultations I do now, the windows on houses are so low to the ground. Holly's back there behind that Elysium, way back there. Windows are so low to the ground. It is really hard to landscape in front of them. And unfortunately, you almost have to have, a lot of things that are the same height, unfortunately, in those situations. One thing is, when I think about landscape design, I'm not thinking about little foundation plantings around, right around the box of the house. I mean, that's another thing in consultations is I'm really, I'm always subtly trying to say, hey, why don't you make a bed way out there? Why don't you make a bed way out there? It's so much, it's been ingrained in us that landscaping is somehow make a privacy border out of giant evergreens around the outside and then plant various things right around the envelope of the house, and we're done. And that's fine, but it's really hard to be creative in a 4-foot wide bed that goes all the way around the house and the windows are this high off the ground. One thing I always recommend is trying to scale those beds to the size of the house. Frequently I'll see houses that are 2 stories and the house is just gigantic and the foundation beds are 4 feet wide. How are you going to put anything in that bed that can actually scale to that house? So, you know, that's part of the issue. The beds need to be bigger. I wish when sidewalks went in, they went in further from the house. And so it created at least that bed that's in between the sidewalk and the house. You know, they leave like this much space. Well, that's just an impossible place to actually landscape well. I'd almost rather have the sidewalk right against the house. And then I could landscape a big bed, you know, outside of that. But they don't. And they leave this awkward place that's only 4 feet wide. And right there is the side of the garage that's, you know, 18 feet tall on the front of the house. And it's really hard to landscape those spaces without using vines or espaliering plants onto the wall. So I frequently, you know, try to get folks to recognize that, you know, your great landscape beds can be out away from the house. You know, you pick an area, you know, make the bed, you know, the focal point. I don't have the camera pointing at the house right this minute. I have it pointing at the shed back here and all these beds that are way out, you know, away from the house. So I can sit on the screen porch and have this view right here rather than, you know, sit out here in the grass and look back at the house. You know what I mean? Like, think about your landscape design and the main parts of your landscape design out away from the house so that you can actually enjoy it from inside the house. Okay, anyway. But it is very difficult to landscape around low windows. This is, you know, houses going in on slab, you know, just on concrete foundations, and then houses with basements, particularly hard to landscape. And those I definitely want to bring my main plantings out away from the house. Because it's difficult to layer up by the house. You're probably only going to have one plant deep in that situation, and then your beds can be out away from it. Okay. Somebody asked if it's okay to move daylilies now. Yes, most definitely. It's fine to move daylilies right now. And as they're emerging, they're easy to see. You can pull those things out of the ground with a shovel, you know, cut them into 3 pieces and go plant them somewhere else, and probably leave them on the driveway for a day as long as it's not hot and sunny, and they'll still survive. You know, they're just tough plants. You know, those things like all of those emerging dividable perennials are pretty easy to, and I've got another one coming up in just a minute. Let's see. Somebody had spider mites on their arborvitae, on one that died last year. They still have 2 that are in pretty good shape. Should they fertilize them now? If you haven't fertilized your garden, this is the time of year to put out a small amount of organic fertilizer. I don't do a lot of fertilizing here. I just once a year put out a small amount of organic fertilizer. But if you thought you wanted to fertilize them, now is the time to do it. And I just do a small amount. I mean, I don't try to push the 2 that are remaining so hard that they end up stressed as well and succumb to spider mites. Also, okay, so somebody said when to plant viburnum in zone 8. In zone 8, any viburnum that will grow there, which is probably 100 different ones, you can plant them anytime. Anytime, 12 months out of the year. You know, I don't do this. So when is the best time to plant anything? If the soil is workable, okay, so if it's frozen solid in zone 3 right now, you're not doing any planting. But if the soil is workable and the plant is acclimated to your area and you're not pushing the boundaries of the plant, like you're not trying to grow a palm up in zone 7A, you know, that's probably a spring planted thing just so it has a season. But for the most part, if it's a plant that's hardy in your area and the ground is workable and you are going to be around the house for the next few weeks, put it in the ground. You know, don't worry about, you know, the perfect time. The perfect time is always when you can monitor it. So the worst time would be 3 days before we go to the beach for 10 days. You know, that's the worst time. But if it's July 12th and I'm home for the next 3 weeks, I'll plant it July 12th. Doesn't matter. You know, it's zone 8. You know, it just doesn't matter. It's hot, I know, but the plants are, I planted as a landscaper. I mean, I couldn't go and just plant October 15th to 22nd because that was the best week of the year. We planted year round. We just made sure at certain times of the year we were monitoring the plants more. Maybe on a landscape job, in the summertime, we were planting plants pretty early in the process so that we could monitor them while we were there building a set of steps or a retaining wall or something like that. Whereas in October, you know, I would do the whole landscape job and then plant the plants almost last, right before the mulch. You know, so I'm thinking through it that way. As long as you're around, plant them, and don't put so much stock in this is the exact day to do it. You know, it's one of those things that freezes you and prevents you from ever getting started on something. So if the plant's healthy and the soil's workable, put it in the ground. Okay, so somebody got a Jane, what they thought was a Jane magnolia. That was the way it was tagged at the nursery. And then, lo and behold, they go to plant it, and it had been replanted into a larger container at some point, and there's another tag a little further down that says Galaxy. What do I think? It's probably a Galaxy magnolia. That's probably what it was originally tagged. They bought them, mixed them up someplace in the process of transplanting them into the 3-gallon containers, or it got mislabeled when it got to the garden center. Somewhere along the line, it probably got mislabeled, and it's a Galaxy. The difference, Jane definitely has more of a cup and just a few petals when it opens. You know, it's pink on the back and kind of white on the inside. Galaxy is a slightly darker color, and it has a few more petals on it. So the petals are a little more strappy, you know, looking, because it has a few more of them. So there is a difference. I think it'd be easy to go on Google and go to Google Images and see whether it's Galaxy or whether it's Jane. Both are great. So, I mean, you didn't lose unless you were trying to match some up, and then you did. But if you weren't trying to match some up, both of them are great plants. So then I got a dividing Autumn Joy sedum. They wanted to know if I had a video for dividing Autumn Joy sedum. I don't have a video just for that, but I mean, with Autumn Joy sedum, hosta, daylilies, any of these emerging bee balm, any emerging perennial that's coming out of the ground with multiple pieces as it's coming up in the spring, almost across the board can be popped out of the ground, chopped in half with a shovel, and divided pretty easily. So definitely sedum, Autumn Joy sedum falls into that category. Really easy one to pop out of the ground and divide. I don't have an individual video on it. I probably should. I tend to overcomplicate my channel with 20-minute videos where I give lots of information in the video, and I don't have a very specific video for just a basic things like that. I probably should. I probably have more views on my channel if I just had a how to divide August Beauty, or I mean, I said August Beauty. We're not going to be dividing August Beauty gardenias. Autumn Joy sedum. So if we're popping Autumn Joy sedum out of the ground and cutting it with a shovel, I probably should, like I said, I should probably have a 3 or 4 minute video for that, because it is a good piece of information that people need to know. But it's more, it comes down to really being, you know, fearless in the garden. You know, planting something in zone, you know, planting a viburnum, you know, where the ground is workable. You know, a lot of these are just, you know, I don't want to say fear, but, you know, a little bit of, you know, just jump out there and do it. I promise you. You know, you'll kill a couple things along the way, you know, but for the most part, almost everything that goes to sleep and comes back slightly wider or slightly bigger can be popped out of the ground, chopped with a shovel, give a piece to your neighbor, divide it across your garden, whatever you want to do with it. Super, super easy. Most of these perennials need to be divided at some point anyway. And that can be things like liriope and mondo grass, and literally anything that a clumping thing that becomes wider each year, whether it's evergreen or deciduous. That's grasses that go to sleep and come back. This carex, this gold carex, I don't know if you can see down there. I could pop it out of the ground, cut it in half right now. Just jump in. Just jump in, and it's easy to do right when they're emerging this time of year. If you want to make 2 out of 1 or 3 out of 1, pretty easy to do. And again, I should have videos that are just simple things. I overcomplicate everything, that's for sure. I'm telling people not to overcomplicate things while my channel is completely overcomplicated. So this is a good question. Somebody asked about using an action hoe. This thing goes by a lot of different names. These, weeding hoe, what are some of the other names? I got action hoe in my head now, and I can't think of stirrup hoe. Some people call these. This is just a tool that will go. I used it in the vegetable garden the other day in that video about redesigning, and it just basically chops weeds right under the soil, right at the roots. Does a pretty good job. It doesn't always kill something if you're decapitating it, but this one will. It'll kill 90% of what you clip off. Using it this time of year, though, in your garden beds can be a danger for sure. And, you know, I was super careful over there because I had a few things popping up out of the ground that I didn't want to cut off. So be incredibly careful with these, with emerging perennials. So if I went back here and tried to use this in this perennial border back here right now, I've got a phlox coming up right there. I've got a penstemon coming up right there. I've got agastache coming up there, got a salvia coming up here, on and on and on. I would decapitate, you know, I'd get to going so fast, cutting weeds. Look at me, I'm cutting weeds, I'm cutting weeds, I'm cutting weeds. I cut my bee balm. So yeah, these are not the best tools to use this time of year. And most of the weeding I do in February and March and early April is hand weeding because the soil's moist, and most all of the weeds will come up, root and all, right now. So what I tend to do out here is walk around in the evening, you know, and just kind of, you know, wander about, see what's coming up. And while I'm in a certain spot, I'll pull 20 or 30 weeds, and then I'll, you know, so I'm not weeding. I'm not coming out here going, I'm going to spend the next 3 hours weeding. I'm doing more. I'll enjoy the garden for 20 minutes and spend 4 of those minutes weeding. That's how I weed the garden out here. So just throwing that out there, so it's not such a task. You know, it's an ongoing, you know, daily, or, you know, let's say 3 or 4 times a week. I end up spending 4 minutes a day to weed. You know, we don't have as many out here because everything's been covered well for the last 3 years, and so my seed bank on weeds is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So by staying on top of it, you know, over the 3 years, I've got more control over it. But I'm weeding, and I'm just doing it as part of enjoying the garden rather than making it a, oh my gosh, I got to go out and spend 3 hours weeding task. Somebody asked if they should spend $20 more a yard on premium compost, because the premium compost at their place has highly beneficial nutrients and trace minerals that are overly deficient in soils. You wouldn't know what was overly deficient in your soil without a soil test. I don't trust any mulch yard to throw fertilizer and micronutrients into the compost. You know, what is the point of having an organic compost if they're going to come along and put non-organics, you know, fertilizers in them in all likelihood, and then trace minerals, you know, in there that maybe you need or maybe you don't need. So again, don't add anything to your soil. Don't add, unless it's just a small amount of basic organic fertilizer that has very low numbers, you know, on the bag, like 5, 3, 2 kind of numbers for the macronutrients. Don't add any general thing to your garden unless it's based on a soil test, and certainly don't let somebody mix things in, because you don't even know how they're mixing it. They might be throwing it on top of the pile and then mixing it with a backhoe, you know, or I mean, you know, with some sort of machine that, you know, or bobcat with a bucket on it, that they're just flipping it over 70 times and going, we mixed it. So that you might get a yard that has 3 times more material in it, you know, 3 times more, what are we calling them? Highly beneficial nutrients and trace minerals that are helpful for overly deficient in soils. That are overly deficient in soils. So you might get extra on those things and you don't need them. So no, I would not pay $20 more for that. So that was a lot of words again, right? Okay. Let's see. So somebody's county recommends removing barberries, and wanted to know about other things that could go back in there. So they're probably up in the northeast in zone. They said zone 6. So imagine they're up in Connecticut or somewhere up there where the barberries are just incredibly invasive. Number one, it's going to be really hard to remove them. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing fight, just like anything else. There's a huge seed bank there. Those barberries been dropping seed for a long time. They're good at making seed. So it's going to take a long time to clean it out. And then there's lots of understory flowering shrubs. The native plant video that went up hopefully yesterday, if everything went properly, that video should have gone up yesterday. A lot of those things are for zone 5, zone 6, zone 7. So those would be good. A lot of those native plants would be good understory plantings back into a space like that. Part of their question, though, was that they didn't want me to recommend trees because coyotes gather in tree lines. And I don't know, I don't know if they were living in like Game of Thrones or something. I never heard of, you know, wow, I don't know where you live, but I definitely don't want coyotes gathering in my tree line back here. Although we do have coyotes in this area, but that was part of the question, is they just didn't want trees because they might have coyotes. I didn't know, and then it just, again, it sounded like a Game of Thrones dire wolf thing. Let's see. Somebody said, this is another funny one, why don't I show my white wedding hydrangea hedge? I don't know, it seemed like like I had a conspiracy, a white wedding hydrangea hiding, you know, I'm hiding them as some sort of conspiracy. They were in a hydrangea pruning video like a month and a half ago. I pruned them in half back here, but they're coming back out right now and bloomed beautifully last year. I've got 2 white weddings back here. I had a 3rd one. And we moved it to the front by, if you look at the what's in flower in the garden video, right at the beginning of that video, that white wedding hydrangea's out at the front out there. And then these 2 are leafing out beautifully back here. And then I've got a moon dance hydrangea paniculata in the front. Just easy. Really, I still think white wedding or moon dance are the best 2 hydrangea paniculatas available right now. The problem is just there seems to be 5 new hydrangea paniculatas every year, so it's hard to figure out, you know, which one is best. But that I showed that in that how to prune hydrangea video, and that video has like 300,000 views, so I think a lot of you watching it have seen it. But the very first thing I pruned in that video is those white wedding hydrangeas, so you can see all the flowers that they had on them before I cut them back, if you want to see them there. So thank you guys for participating in the question and answer video every week. Again, ask questions down below this video, and I'll pick from those next week. Thanks for watching.